What's up, guys? This is episode 8 of the Operation Paragon podcast, and I'm your host, Gabriel Schickler. Today we are joined by the one and only C.B. Robertson, who is a writer, philosopher, and the owner of the account Caffeine and Philosophy on Instagram. If you're familiar with him, you'll know that he is a very well-spoken individual with an immense depth of knowledge in philosophy, and very deliberate in forming his worldview and beliefs, which I deeply appreciate because we see many people in the world today that are content to not really think through what they believe and just go along with it because it's, what people in my ideological camp believe. He doesn't do that. He takes a very critical, analytical view of the world, and so although we are far from agreeing on everything, as you will hear, I think we can all learn a lot from having these open and honest conversations, especially with people that don't think like we do, because it gives a very valuable perspective to life in general. So, I love this conversation. If this kind of thing interests you, I know you will as well. Today we talk about his choice of switching from a career in the tech space to working with his hands in a trade job, the importance of admiration, how to identify the beliefs you hold genuinely versus just the beliefs that you've been told to hold by somebody else, how to get started examining the world around you and thinking like a philosopher, and much more. Hope you guys enjoy this interview. Just a quick note before we get started. Around the 33-minute mark, you will hear a slight deviation from the conversation. This is because the free version of Zoom only allows you to record for 40 minutes before kicking you off. I did not originally intend for this meeting to go longer than that. We started to really get into the conversation, and I didn't want to cut it off early, and so you will hear me signing up for Zoom Live and getting a little bit distracted. It's not a huge interruption, but just wanted to let you know that's what's going on if there was any confusion. Like I said, this was an amazing conversation. Thank you to Chris for coming on, and I hope you guys enjoy it. The first thing that I really want to start with is just, your general interest in the trades and everything like that. Obviously, with a handle like Caffeine and Philosophy, we're going to get into some of the more intellectual side of things, but this podcast and this project is all about building capable men, and part of that is, getting yourself established in the world, finding some path that you enjoy, hopefully something that's going to be fulfilling for you, allow you to provide for your family and everything like that. So to get things started, I'm just really curious, kind of, if you can give us an idea of, your background, what got you set on it, why you're interested enough in it to be, posting about it and everything like that.
Oh, sure. In the trade specifically.
Yes.
Well, it was actually probably not the way most guys in construction get into the trades. It was through philosophy, of all things. I was invited by an acquaintance to a book speech that I didn't know who the author was. I was like, sure, why not? I didn't have any plans, so I went along. There were a couple of girls going, so you gotta go socialize. And it was this absolutely remarkable speech about the crisis of attention. And the speaker was a gentleman who has become one of my favorite contemporary authors named Matthew Crawford. And I was immediately hooked by his presentation on the crisis of attention and the appropriation of our attention and the necessity of a language of the ownership of our attention within this crisis. But it wasn't The World Beyond Your Head, which was the book he was talking about at the time, that captivated me, but his first book, which is called Shop Class as Soulcraft. And it was basically a panegyric in defense of, or a polemic perhaps, in defense of manual competence, and a sort of criticism of the pure information economy ideal that we've seen pushed in various forms, particularly with the so-called STEM acronym, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics.
You're talking about the people that say just learn to code and all your problems will be solved, that kind of thing.
Right. Like the coding is great, actually. It's a perfectly valid, useful skill to have. Not very useful, though, if you don't have computers to code on. You need
electricity.
Computers. Right. You need servers, and that requires this. There's this hidden infrastructure that like no one is aware of, but which is everywhere. And it's what runs your water to your house. It's what runs your power, your electricity, which is a very mysterious force.
Don't even get me
And
started on Wi-Fi.
right, exactly. Um, and it turns out all these things exist in the material world. They aren't just a given. They don't just appear at your computer
And they aren't a human
ready.
right.
Right. They have to be brought there. And there's a whole world of people who work closer to that material domain that's necessary for all this nicer stuff, which is nice. It is
Mm-hmm.
great to be able to code, to play video games or watch TV or enjoy the benefits of LED lighting and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
But what was the curious experience is that when you get closer to that, and when you work less with just your head and more your hands as well as your head, it's very much a
Mm-hmm.
false dichotomy, as Mike Rowe has pointed out. It's not work with your hands instead of your head. It's very much both.
Mm-hmm.
Um, although much of the intellectual work does neglect the hands. Um, you What is surprising is that many people, men in particular, it seems, though I think women might find this too in their own way, it's way more satisfying.
Mm-hmm.
We're doing something much closer to what we were meant to do at like a biological level.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Working with our hands has an almost therapeutic value to it. And so this work that has been demeaned by basically all of academic culture for the last 25 years, ever since
Mm-hmm.
they started kicking shop classes out of middle schools and high schools. Um, A, can earn you a lot more money than they imagine it
Mm-hmm.
can. But B, it's a lot more intrinsically satisfying. And many people give up, you know, uh, very, very high cap careers
Mm-hmm.
in order to pursue things that are more meaningful at the level of their body, that are
Mm-hmm.
more engaging in that way. And I think that's very valuable. I had quit a job at Microsoft, actually a subcontractor of Microsoft, where we were doing um, CRM database management. Is
Interesting.
the like there was potential for serious upside there, but it was extremely uh, ghostly work.
Mm.
And
Mm-hmm.
me and a former Marine turned woodland firefighter who also worked there ended up quitting about the same time. I became a truck driver. He became a railroad engineer. So
Wow.
it's very, very similar.
Completely change it. Yeah, total
Yeah.
change of direction.
And we both enjoyed it. Now, I didn't stay in truck driving because I wound up getting married, and over
Mm-hmm.
the road truck driving is not exactly a viable career for most people within the
Mm-hmm.
context of a marriage and family. But I was inspired in part by Matthew Crawford to get more into the trades. And after a few years doing pest control, dealing with rats and ants and spiders and bed bugs and that kind of thing,
Mm-hmm.
got into electrical work. It's fantastic. I can't recommend it highly enough, along with plumbing and carpentry, um, and so forth, especially trim carpentry. And I have a good friend who's a tile guy. He does some very cool stuff. And it's do you make as much as a doctor or a lawyer or a politician?
Mm-hmm.
No, you don't. Uh, but it's, as they say, honest work, and it uses your body in a way that you can be proud of, and in a way that a lot of these, I think, wealthier individuals who often go into a fair amount of debt in order to even get their foot in the
Mm-hmm.
door, um, are actually quite envious of. There's a lot of grass is always greener dynamics in the life paths that we choose.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and the really interesting thing to me about the trades too is that it's not like a sales job in that you're exclusively eating what you kill. Like you might still make some hourly rate or something like that. But if you're going to work in a small business or work in your own business, which you know, I'd say I don't know the exact statistics, but I'd assume the majority of businesses, in the trades and in these spaces are doing a lot more local work, much more kind of in the community. First, that's really valuable because it gives you those networks and those connections and that relationship. But then the second thing that I think these people really forget is just like you said, how fulfilling it is to really just make something with your own hands. Like I think back to when I was a kid, I loved Legos, man. I found some of my dad's when I was 4 years old, and then it was all I asked for Christmas for like a decade, you know? And just the ability to take something, and I think a big part of that is just because, like, as men, we're very spatially oriented. We like to have the environment controlled, everything like that.
Yes.
One thing that I am really curious about, so you mentioned, like, you went and became a truck driver. Your friend did the work with the railroads. A lot, that's not a very, as I'm sure you were, a very popular kind of take, because a lot of people will look at, a move like that and be like, oh, you should go be an entrepreneur. You should, enter a field that'll give you potential to make, 10 million bucks a year and all these different things. Um, so can you speak a little bit to, like, the value specifically that you find in it, that you would want to, like you said, step away from these more ethereal, vacuous, like, maybe I'll get there someday goals in the tech space, and then switch to something
Yeah,
that's more physical?
absolutely. Well, I mean, you kind of have to start at the bottom and work your way up. I think a lot of guys are very impatient to get
Hmm.
to the absolute top, but they forget the resentment and contempt that people feel toward leaders who don't have those base skills mastered.
Hmm.
Like, no one wants to work under a boss who doesn't understand the work involved.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? Um, and so you have to, what people admire, I think, is just basic skills and manual
Hmm.
competence. People admire manual competence. They admire lots of things, of course, but that rush to be the entrepreneur who's got their Bugatti, who's got all this, who's got the like Andrew Tate women hanging on them and
Hmm.
so forth. Like, that's it becomes a kind of caricature and a very tunnel vision view of the end point without thinking about the work necessary to get there along
Hmm.
along the way. And what you find is that a lot of the people who get there, like, feel a sense of having missed the ride in some way.
Hmm.
Like, my favorite example, Andrew Tate's an easy one to point to, but my favorite example of this is actually George Soros.
Really?
Um, he has a book that he wrote called The Alchemy of Finance. It's a very um on the one hand, it's kind of an evil book in the sense that it's trying to, he literally believes that he has completed a dialectic that began with Marx and Hegel.
Really?
But if you think about it, that's sort of his concluding paragraph of the whole
Hmm.
book. But if you don't look at his the idea of reflexivity in finance,
Hmm.
um, in moral terms, and instead look at it in psychological terms, what you see is one of the most wealthy and powerful men in the world, who wrote this at a time that he was already extremely wealthy and powerful,
Hmm.
who was far more interested in cultivating his identity as a philosopher than as a wealthy and powerful financier.
You're talking about Soros?
Yes,
Really?
yes,
Wow.
yes. He, as wealthy and this is a man who has achieved the dreams that all of these would-be alphas want to achieve.
Hmm.
But that's not what he wants. What he wants is to be a part of this philosophical conversation. And he
Hmm.
wants to be remembered primarily as a philosopher, as a dialectician who has advanced this idea of reflexivity.
Hmm.
And you see the same thing with Andrew Tate when he was being interviewed by a psychiatrist. It was a very interesting conversation. And the psychiatrist asked him, "Is there anyone who you envy?" And at first, instinctually, he said, "No, there's no one I envy. Everyone wants what I have." And then he
Hmm.
paused and he said, "There is one type of man I envy." And he says, "Most men will say that they don't want what I have, but they do. They really do secretly.
Mm.
But there is a certain kind of man who actually genuinely doesn't want these things and doesn't
Hmm.
care. And I am envious of that man."
Interesting.
And
Uh,
so the acquisition of that final place, the rising to the peak of the hierarchy,
mhm.
seems to persistently be far less satisfying than people imagine it to be when they're at the bottom of the ladder.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you don't want to be at the bottom, but you don't actually have to be at this proverbial top in order to have a good life and to be satisfied.
Mm-hmm.
And being at the top seems to bring about all of this stress and frustration
Mm-hmm.
and nasty politics that makes it
Yeah.
perhaps not as fun as you
Well,
anticipate.
that would make sense why somebody like Soros gets to where he is. If, like you're saying, he's driven more by being a philosopher than making money. Because
Mhm.
um, I think it was Alex Hormozy months and months ago. He did a calculation where he broke down exactly what you need to be living like pretty much the highest life imaginable. Like you've got the yacht, you've got the fancy apartment in a amazing neighborhood. You've got your vacation home, all these different things. And he broke it
Right.
down, and it came down to like 3 million a year to be living the absolute most comfortable life you could be, after taxes and everything like that.
And what
So
does Alex Hormozy say you have to do in order to make that income?
yeah, nowhere near as much as he is doing.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
yeah.
I remember listening to a speech he was giving where he was talking to his entrepreneur friends, and he said,
Hmm.
the thing you guys all need to do is to stop trying to do 10 things at once.
Yeah.
Find the one thing that is efficient at making you the most money per hour,
Hmm.
and just do that over and over and over and over again.
Yeah. And
And
you
I'm
also
sure that works, but the question becomes, you can reframe the question from what do you want to have
hmm
into who do you want to become? Now, obviously, you need
yes.
a base level of uh, income, in order
Hmm.
to, live a
Function.
comfortable and
Yeah.
effective life. But that level is far lower than a lot of
Hmm.
people act like it is. And the cost is who you are in a
hmm
way, because as Heraclitus told us, you are what you repeatedly do. That
hmm
becomes your identity, just as the friends you hang out with become who you do. If you do one thing, you become one thing at a certain level. And
hmm
I don't think any man actually wants to be that. They want to reach a level of success where they can do lots of things,
hmm
but the highest levels of status and success come at the expense of a kind of extremity
Yeah.
that bars the acquisition of the diversity of skills and qualities that I think we really admire in
hmm
other men.
Yeah, so you're more than just a one-dimensional person. That makes perfect sense. You're also reminding me of something that I heard Andy Frisella say pretty recently, where he was talking about basically like I just heard a clip of this today. I'm sorry, I'm totally I'm totally blanking now.
Oh, you're good.
I'm sure it'll come back to me. You were talking about a bunch of different things. You are what you repeatedly do, becoming that kind of person. Oh, he was talking about his like why financial success is important for a lot of people and why you shouldn't like necessarily say like don't try to get those cars and things, because he said when he was broke he wanted to drive a white Lamborghini and have a private jet, and that was what motivated him to get started. And then
Right.
he got to the top, and now he has one of the biggest car collections in the world, and he's like, I love cars. That's not why I'm doing this. It's about the mission, it's about changing people's lives, creating jobs, taking care of his employees' families, everything like that. And that's that's really powerful. So
Right.
you have mentioned multiple times, you've evidently read Soros's book. You referenced Heraclitus, however you pronounced it. Never sure with those. And your handle is Caffeine and Philosophy. So
Mhm.
what I want to get into, you had a very, very interesting post on your story just a few days ago. I think it was sometime last week. You were talking about, I believe it was specifically kind of the gun community and how, you need to have these things or you aren't a serious gun owner, you can't defend
Oh,
yourself.
yes.
Yes. And you said you brought in this principle out to life in general. And you said there is no philosopher, no great thinker who you have to read in order to have serious opinions about the matter. Not Plato, not Nietzsche, not Locke, not even Socrates or Homer. It's good to read these guys for common parlance, perhaps for enjoyment and inspiration, but Plato didn't read Plato, nor did Nietzsche read Nietzsche. What is necessary is curiosity, openness, dedicated time in pursuit of a given question. And from these three things, a body of familiar literature will follow, which may or may not include authors other people think you have to read in order to be serious. So, just based on what you've said so far, you've already referenced multiple people, multiple things you've read. I personally have consumed a lot of stuff in kind of the business, self-development mindset space, but I have not touched philosophy, even though I have a ton of books, from college and before that, um, on my shelf here. And like I do read some, but from an outsider perspective, I know that I'm nowhere near as well versed in philosophy as I would like to be. So with the idea in mind that you don't necessarily have to read any one person to have the right to ask questions about your life, think about the world, where would you recommend people start as far as curating their own worldview and just figuring out what is the correct way in their mind to view life?
Oh man. Well, I mean, a part of my worldview is that, people are different and that there isn't necessarily going to be one path. The sort of classical introduction to philosophy is reading Plato's Republic. And there's good reason for that. One, it's very entertaining. You don't, if you're reading it correctly, you can't really walk away from it, especially after your first or second read through, and have any clear idea of what Plato himself believes or advocates.
Because
It's
he's just
this
asking
kind of,
questions.
it's this bewildering dialogue where they're going
Mhm.
down these kind of absurd paths, but there's, well, what if this is the case? And then they explore these things. And the whole point of the dialogue, many people don't know this and believe it's some sort of communist, fascist
Propaganda.
advocacy for tyranny. What they miss in the context is that Socrates was supposedly commissioned by Plato's father to talk his other son, Plato's brother Glaucon, out of his ambitions for being a politician. So the whole thing is about like it's exploring the question, what is justice? And even the entire metaphor of the just city is a thought experiment meant to explore the nature of justice. But it doesn't actually give a clear answer of what justice is. It only imparts this very strong feeling that understanding what it is clearly extremely important, because how we build our lives kind of follows from the nature, or should follow from the nature of this thing that we don't understand. And I think from a very young age, I hadn't read Plato's Republic in any kind of depth, but I was very concerned that I might live my life incorrectly, that I might mislive. And my wife still to this day makes fun of me for that phrasing. What do you mean mislive? That no one wants to get to the end and feel like they wasted their life. And so from that view of not wanting to find yourself at 80 years old, 90 years old, and having regrets, sort of looking forward, looking back, it makes the question of what is actually good in life, what is valuable in life, what should I care about and what should I not care about, takes on a sort of urgent feeling to it. Not so urgent that you can't take your time and enjoy the exploration. But I think many people see that kind of meta question as kind of silly. Or too abstract and not concrete. It doesn't. They're like, I'm just going to pursue, like, it's clearly good to have money. I'm going to pursue money, and it can lead to a kind of tunnel vision, like we were talking about before with people like George Soros and so forth. And I've talked with my friend Jack a little bit about how there's this tendency that you see wealthy business people who suddenly take an interest in philosophy and they all want to be philosophers. And then in the philosophy domain, there's a certain kind of philosopher who feels like they reached the end of philosophy and they're like, oh, I should have been an artist.
Really?
And then they sort of pine for art. The last thing that Socrates did before he died was composing poetry. There's something perhaps poetic about that. And then among the artists, of course, the starving artists, they all want money, right? So there's this grass is always greener
Hmm.
triangle going on, and that's not to say you should avoid all of them or just pick one or anything like that. It's just it's I think important to be aware of the limitations in fulfillment
Hmm.
these things can bring beyond a certain level, whether that's money and there are limits to what philosophy can do for your life,
Hmm.
um, and perhaps with art as well. So, I mean, it would be overly simplistic and perhaps not meaningful to just say it's all about a balance to a young person,
Hmm.
because that doesn't convey the sense of the meaning of that balance to someone who
Hmm.
hasn't sort of learned it by testing the limits of where these things sort of uh, drop off in their return on investment.
Hmm.
But I think what's important is to think about what is valuable and to think and to explore these questions of what is valuable. Have I
Hmm.
been neglecting my body? For example, your body is valuable. Um, your attention is valuable.
Hmm.
um Maybe not to the exclusion of all else, but money is valuable, relationships are valuable. There are all kinds of things um that matter, or that other people want you to believe matter, but perhaps matter less than they want you to believe them to be.
Mm.
Politics would be one example of this.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be the person that says politics doesn't matter. I believe politics is at the very least interesting,
Hmm.
and has an effect on our world and on our culture and so forth. But you probably know the type of the person whose entire world revolves around
Hmm.
politics. And if things don't politically go their way, the sky will literally fall. They won't be able to function.
Hmm.
And when you look back on, I'm not just talking 20 or 30 years in the past, but like 2,000, 3,000 years in the past, some of the political
Hmm.
and martial catastrophes that have come to people, and you see the incredible feats of art and human achievement and resilience that have survived through these horrible things.
Hmm.
Like, really, people survived the collapse of Rome, the invasions of the Mongols and the
Hmm.
Huns, but you think another 4 years of Biden will end Western civilization? It's a little like you've lost perspective.
Hmm.
And so I think remembering to ask the questions about what is valuable here. If I did get everything that I wanted politically, what would I do with that?
Mm.
What kind of life would I create? That helps retain perspective, because it turns out even if you get literally nothing that you want politically, you can still do most of the things you wanted to do. You just
Hmm.
have to go about it a little more strategically. So
Yeah. Yeah. Not to mention, like, as far as the political front is concerned, if you can get an entire population to agree with you on something, whatever laws are on the books just straight up don't matter. Like we can see this pretty obviously in, cities where they're just straight
yeah,
up not prosecuting a lot of crimes because it's too burdensome for the system to,
right.
actually enforce those things. So that's a really good point.
In theory. Now you're not going to get everyone to agree with you,
Yeah.
but a lot of the things that people generally want to do with their lives don't require anybody else to agree with them.
Hmm.
Everyone in the world could think it's a bad idea
Hmm.
and think, oh, that he should be stopped. But if you're like, no, I want to move my family out to rural Montana and raise sheep, and they're like, you should be a doctor. All of the consensus in the world can't stop you from doing that. Now, I'm
Hmm.
not saying they won't try to tax you or like follow you if you say the wrong
Regulate
things in
things. Yeah.
context. Yeah, but like the you know once you step out of the domain of political conversation and that battle for power, which is what
Hmm.
Plato was arguing against, the corrupting power of the Ring of Gyges, which he spoke of,
Mm.
which inspired the entire Lord of the Rings and the danger of power. um Once you step out of that and you become a private person, an idiota in Greek, um the whole world opens up, and it turns out it's a much bigger place with a lot more possibilities and a lot more complexity and beauty than
Mm-hmm.
that constrained, narrow view of politics uh, illuminates.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, and I also do really like the concept of taking that looking backward perspective. It reminds me a lot of, I'm sure you've read it, Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, where one of the things he says is, if you're ever unsure of what to do or you just want to get your life on the right path, look to yourself in the future and ask that future self, you know, what would you do instead of acting as wrongly as you are about to right now, and kind of keeping that perspective. Um,
Yes.
so kind of in keeping with what we've been talking about so far with, the trades, maybe money isn't everything and you can find fulfillment, obviously support yourself and everything like we've said, but
Mm.
looking for a greater cause or a greater calling than just gratifying your own desires. How should somebody go about, with respect to their own individual desires and sovereignty and just, what they want to do with their life? How do they start to define those values and the things that are actually important to them, as opposed to like, well, my mom and dad said that, I should think this politically, or, my friends from high school think I should, believe this about human nature, or, whatever the case may be.
Yeah. Um, that is the challenge, and putting names to that is the challenge. Um, but the first, I guess the two steps people can take are to learn to serve and to be a worker, to be one of the drones, and practice bringing value according to what other people think is valuable.
Mm,
Um, and and over time you will come to develop your own opinions about, like, I think this is stupid, from the baseline that you've established through experience. But the important thing is to acquire that experience in the first place, to go out and do things. And working in a company, or working for someone else, or just going to school more, joining the military, there are all kinds of ways of going about acquiring experience, but experience is the important thing. And the second thing, I think, is to follow what you admire, even if you can't put your finger on exactly what you admire about someone. But
mm-hmm,
that the language, I think, often comes later. But if something sticks out to you as, like, that is inspiring to me, if that was, that's a point of reference in
mm-hmm,
terms of things to copy and to emulate. And what's crazy is that your feelings about what you admire change over time, and who you admire in your 30s will be dramatically different than who you admired in your 20s. I was a huge fan of Christopher Hitchens when I was in my 20s. I still am to some degree, but there was a gentleman sort of associated with Hitchens named Daniel Dennett, who, in my 20s, I'm very ashamed to say this, I thought Dennett was a smart person, stupid person. Like, this is someone that smart people get to look down on and laugh, in the way that there's, like, people talk about a stupid person, smart person. They'll often try to
mm.
peg Joe Rogan as that type. It's like, Joe Rogan is a lot more curious than you naysayers. But like, me and my friend we thought Dennett was like a smart person, stupid person. So
Mm-hmm.
all the smart philosophers can point and laugh at this guy. And in my 30s, I was like, no, he was right about, like, everything. But I couldn't see it at the time. I couldn't see it at the time. And I learned compatibilism from him. His view of consciousness, I think, is very valuable. And so it's okay like to follow who you admire, and then allow your views to change over time.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, that's powerful. And so you said something about admiration.
Mhm.
I want to dive into that a little bit more, because you said specifically, even if you can't put your finger on what it is that you admire about that person. Personally, I think that's really important, because it takes you out of uh the yeah, I see the time.
Mm.
I'm currently trying to sign up for the upgraded Zoom so we can just keep this rolling. So hopefully I
Okay.
can figure that out here in the next couple seconds. But yeah,
Yeah.
So what I was asking about admiration, though, um, is it takes you out of that mental mode where you are, just uh, kind of trying to logically deduce things removed from yourself, and gets you into the more emotional thing of like, what do I actually want, and being more honest with yourself. Um,
Mm,
so can you talk a little bit more on, I guess, kind of um, trusting your trusting your gut and your own intuition and what you want to do with your life. The meeting's about to end, so give me just a sec. Sorry.
no, you're good.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Oh, it might have gone through. Okay. Okay. Wonderful.
Real time tech
We are
improvements.
still going. I saw the 5 second countdown going on for me.
Nice.
Okay. Well, that is wonderful. We will just keep on going then. Do you need me to repeat the question, or?
Fantastic. Possibly, but I mean, are you asking how to navigate the line between like concepts and our feelings?
Yeah, and also just like maybe giving some people a little bit of trust like with their own intuition, because
Yes.
one of the reasons that people follow individuals regardless of their own merits, like the Andrew Tate's, Andy Frisillas, Alex Ramos's, all Soros's, like all the prominent men that we've mentioned so far, the reason that one of the reasons that we gravitate towards these people is they seem to have something figured out that we don't. And so a
Mhm.
lot of times, in place of having some clear idea of how we want our own lives to go, we'll say, well, I'll just take the advice of somebody that clearly knows more about it than I do.
Right. Well, and Tate, and I haven't listened to as much Hormozy as I have of Tate, but
Mhm,
part of what makes them attractive is they have this kind of contagious positive energy.
mhm,
And it's very easy for men, especially young men, to see that in a culture that generally frowns upon that and
mhm.
views men as kind of broken women. Um,
Yeah,
and to say,
lesser
here's
than.
right, and to say here's a validation of feelings that have been repressed in a
Mhm,
sense in me. And so there's a feeling of connection, but he is also taken it and developed it and refined this
mhm.
energy into something that feels very powerful and then want that for themselves.
And very real.
And
Yeah.
that desire is not a bad thing.
Mhm,
That desire to like, here's someone who has something that I want. I'm going to copy them. I'm going to emulate that.
mhm.
That's good. I'm not saying Andrew Tate is necessarily something you should want. Um, there are better things to aspire for, in my opinion. But it's not
Mhm,
my place to tell young men what they should or shouldn't want. They have to discover that on their own.
mhm,
Um, it's sufficient, I think, to see something admirable and positive and to say, I want to emulate that. The really toxic, dangerous thing is to see something positive and powerful like that and to say, I hate that.
mm,
I want to tear it down. Um, because that gives you no path uh, of empowerment on your own.
mhm,
And many people disguise that as just wanting something else, but there's a suspicious amount of attention given to the things that they think are
mhm.
not desirable. Um,
Yeah.
you know,
It is very fascinating to me. Like we talk a lot about this, like the victim culture and how people have somehow made it noble to be stuck in a bad situation and do nothing about it. The thing that I think needs more attention is the fact that people think themselves, again, noble, or a better human or something than somebody like Tate or one of these individuals, because they say, oh well, I'm not like that.
right.
And I think I actually wrote a post on this pretty recently. I was talking about how calling somebody prideful, this was actually episode 2 on this podcast. um, Calling somebody prideful, I really hate it when people say that, because it's a very loose,
Yeah.
vacuous term. And what that means is there is something I don't like about this guy, and I can't actually point to what he's doing. So I
Yeah.
actually used Tate as an example. I said I have huge problems with building your wealth on a pornography business. Like I think that's reprehensible. Um,
Right.
that doesn't change the fact that I can point to an actual thing that he has done and say, hey, I have issues with him on this. but I'm not throwing out the baby with the bathwater and saying like, I don't think like any of his message is good. I don't think anything that he's doing is like adding any value to the world, maybe giving people a perspective shift, all these different things. And I mean, for, like I'm a Catholic. For any Christians out there, like one of the most fundamental things that we, as far as I can tell, actually all agree on is that God is kind of directing the course of things. He will take bad events and use them to, make
Yeah.
better outcomes down the line. And
And
so,
I'm not a Christian, let alone a
yes, yeah.
Catholic, but I do appreciate and enjoy the kind of mystery that you see
Mhm.
in the ostensible plan. Um, I have two favorite books of the Bible, or Ecclesiastes and Job.
I love
And
Ecclesiastes, dude.
yeah, and what I love about Job in particular, Ecclesiastes doesn't have the same sort of plot to it, though I think
Hmm.
Ecclesiastes ties into a lot of things we're talking about here.
Yeah.
The vanity of all these,
All is vanity. Yeah.
yeah, which you can find in Gilgamesh and other places as well. But
Hmm.
um, the story of God in Job is that he does these things and Job can't make sense of them. And says,
Hmm.
why would you permit bad things to happen to good people? And his friends come in with essentially theological answers
And they're
saying, you
trying
clearly
to
done
speak
wrong.
for God. Yeah.
And to defend God. And then
Hmm.
God comes down and says, who are you who speak without knowledge? You
Hmm.
have not spoken rightly of me. To his friends, not
Hmm.
even to Job, although I think he says something similar to Job. But the like you can't possibly understand like the plan
Hmm.
or me or the world. You can take it into a secular context too. You
Yeah.
can't understand the world in some kind of
Hmm.
systematized fashion, as Matthew Crawford was speaking about before, says, the world is its own best model. There
Hmm.
will always be limitations to the models that these economists and these
Yeah.
cultural uh, corporate Silicon Valley
Hmm.
nudgers try to make about where people are and what's going to happen. Those models are always incomplete, and there's
Hmm.
actually epistemological, mathematical reasons why they must be incomplete.
Hmm.
Um, so that just letting go of the belief that you can possess absolute certainty or absolute
Hmm.
knowledge, and just like, well, I can at least pursue what is appearing to be good to me, whether
Hmm.
that's manual competence or strong relationships, or it could be appearances of wealth. There's nothing wrong with wealth, in my opinion. I'm
Hmm.
not a believer in the book of James as wealth is bad. But I, I say that as someone who's gone through the with my wife, the who's that Christian wealth management guy? His name's escaping me at the moment.
There are quite a few of those.
Yeah. The
Um, uh,
most famous one. I can remember all
I don't
sorts of
know.
obscure things, but I can't remember Ramsey.
Oh,
Or
he's Christian? Oh, okay.
yeah,
Hmm.
very much so, I think.
I'm not very familiar with him. His philosophy with money has never really resonated with me, so I haven't dove
Yeah.
into much
No,
of what he does. But
it's mostly the opposition to debt that I think is
hmm,
the dovetail. The rest is just practical.
yeah, yeah.
But like there's good stuff to be had there.
Hmm.
But regardless, I think the exploration of these values in the manner of Plato's Republic, just exploring them and
Hmm.
enjoying the exploration without even the promise that you will necessarily arrive at some kind of conclusion.
Hmm.
Um, but you wind up with great conversations. You wind up with hopefully
Hmm.
better ways of doing things. And I think you wind up with what a lot of these extremely wealthy and successful people find that they miss a lot, which is
Hmm.
meaningful and serious companionship with people that they can speak directly and frankly with.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. No, that's powerful, man. Um, so to kind of, I guess, bring this all to a point and close this out here. When we were setting up this call, you mentioned that you had to get your kids to bed. So kind of tying
yes.
all, what we've talked about, meaning, finding your path, everything like that. Um, I've had a couple of guys on so far that, are married, they have beautiful families. I'm wondering first, what value and challenges being a father has brought to your life. And, kind of going off of that, how that really encapsulates what we've been talking about like, figuring out what you actually want and going after it and, trusting your gut, just, kind of everything that we've discussed up until this point.
Yeah. Well, oh man, that's a tough one.
Thank you.
I it's hard because like a friend of mine who was Air Force Special Forces posted a funny meme. That's weird quoting memes on a
It sounds
podcast,
so
but
weird saying
it
a meme
was
out loud, doesn't it? Such a
yeah,
boomer moment.
but
Yeah.
it was a picture of a guy. The caption was like, guys have two modes, and one is like a hobbit like farming with his like
Oh,
family around him in the
I think
woods,
I've
and
seen this exact same one before. Yeah.
and then the second one is like Starship Troopers descending into
Yeah.
hell,
Yeah.
like going into war and stuff. And but my friends, you know, commentary on it is like, and the irony is you're always dreaming about the other one no matter which one you're in.
That is so true.
And it was a funny like
Yeah.
I think about that in the context of parenting and family, because it's a very common experience for fathers and people, you know, husbands to, within the context of those relationships, be like, oh God, this is so stressful. This is so
Hmm.
frustrating. If only I could have a minute to myself. I'm running on literally, 2 hours of sleep and borderline lethal doses of caffeine. And
Hmm.
the stress involved, I'm exaggerating slightly. My situation is fine. But it has its frustrations.
Hmm.
I had to go out and, you know, uh, give a talking to my son who was swinging a stick at a chicken. It's like, no, you don't do that, and I will
Hmm.
break all the sticks in this backyard if I see you do that again. Like, it is very not okay. Don't swing your sticks at your sister. Don't swing your stick at the chickens, not at the dog, not
Hmm.
at me, not at your mother. And it's frustrating, and you want to go out and be alone.
Hmm.
But I remember being single, and being single was 95% awesome and 5% crushing loneliness.
Hmm.
And the like the a few of my friends in moments of intoxicated, usually, directness have said, don't you ever not be grateful for the thing that you have that I would give
Hmm.
anything to have. And it's easy to forget that same grass is
So,
always
so
greener
important. Yeah.
irony. And I think for me, I have always been ambivalent to negative towards small children, and absolutely love kids. Like, once they hit like 6 or 7, super fun. We can talk about all kinds of stuff. We can go play soccer. We can do all
Yep.
this. The like 5 and unders, like, I don't really know what to do with you. Go hang out with you. Do something else. Stop hanging on this. Stop breaking your toys. Stop
Yeah.
peeing on the floor. But y- my desire to have more kids than I would have thought I would have wanted
Hmm.
came from listening to lots of older people who seem to have their lives together. And no
Hmm.
one ever regretted having more kids, you know, except for like very sad, bitter people.
Yeah.
And so, whereas lots of people, there's one, that I have a few sources I go to for my news and thought and current events.
Hmm.
And there's one guy who's a very interesting character, a Christian blogger who writes out of Italy now, um, who has 4 kids, and he says, "Oh yeah, we've kind of regretted that we didn't have more."
Mm.
And so you just sort of hear that, and you think, "I am a mammal. This is literally what I'm designed to do."
Hmm.
It would make sense to imagine that I will have more fulfillment. This is fulfilling some kind of greater purpose.
Hmm.
And when you think about it, what could you possibly do intellectually or in business or in athletics or in any other domain that
Yeah.
is more important than having more kids.
That's such an
At a
important point. If
at
you,
like an evolutionary psychology level, our desire to do all those things is to impress mates so that we can have
mhm.
more kids. That's the reason for that.
Yeah,
So
and
you
the thing
just
that's
have
so
faith in that, and here I am.
yeah, yeah. I mean, as you're talking, the thing that occurs to me that's so important about that is, you take that kind of perspective looking backward on your own life, but you put that 300 years in the future. Unless you're Alexander the Great, nobody is going to remember who you are. Nobody is going to care about anything you did. But
Precisely.
your your genetic imprint is directly responsible for the existence of every single one of your descendants until the end of time. And not
Yeah.
only that, we remember Alexander the Great. Nobody alive today, nobody that's been alive for the past 1,000 years has any idea what that guy was actually like. We can read what people said about him, we can read what he did.
Yeah.
None of us can get in his mind and actually know what he thought. We can respect him, being buried with his hands empty outside the tomb, all these things. It's like, that's great. That's just a story that doesn't actually tell you about like the entire truth of the person. Um,
Precisely.
but then, yeah, like you're saying, having that legacy and that imprint is so important, and that's
Yeah.
yeah, really a beautiful thing. Like as a guy that is currently dating, looking to get married eventually, like it's
Nice.
yeah, I know it's going to be certainly a challenge because especially as a man, it's going to be a lot more responsibility than I'm currently dealing with. Um, but also, and I didn't expect us to go back to the book of Job, but the thing that I like most from that book is, the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the Lord. And I'm
Yes.
trying to adopt that mentality into my own life because I've recognized that, like, in this existence, there are going to be highs and there are going to be lows. And if you don't like let yourself process what the lows feel like, you're also walling yourself off from the highs. And so
Right.
I'm trying, and it's very difficult, obviously, but I'm trying to build in the capacity in my daily life where I can say, like, this sucks. Thank you for letting me live through it and keep going and everything like that. And
Right.
even if you're
Well,
not, like necessarily religious, I still think that's very important to do, to recognize that there is a purpose behind whatever suck
yeah.
you're going through.
I mean, if you're willing to entertain a theological counterpoint from a non-believer,
Absolutely.
I've heard a pastor say that Job was actually wrong for saying, "Blessed be the name of the Lord; He gives and
Mm,
takes away," and that because he wasn't being honest with God, he wasn't
really.
expressing himself. He wasn't actually expressing how he truly felt. It was a veneer of piety, but
Mm,
not the actual connection with God that he was supposed to pursue. And this was at a time where a belief in heaven and hell wasn't really strong. It's like you lived on this earth and then you
mhm.
died and you were gone. That's the
Yep.
idea. And you either lived in a connection with God or you lived separate from God.
Yeah, for
Um,
for the listeners that aren't familiar, this is something that continued even into the time of Christ and beyond that, where the Jews were divided into the Pharisees and the Sadducees, which were two different sects. And one of the biggest divisions between them was that one of them believed there was an afterlife, and the other believed that, this is it, and then once you die, you're done.
you go
Um,
to Sheol, which
yeah,
is the
exactly.
garbage pit.
Yeah.
Um, but the pastor said it was only at the end where Job sort of cries out to God,
Hmm.
asking, demanding an explanation for this. That's
Hmm.
the moment of connection. I've heard a number of Jesuits in particular say the blasphemer is much closer to God than the agnostic or
Mm.
than the passive atheist, because at least the blasphemer is like taking it seriously. That lashing
Mm.
out at God is in its own way a kind of bid for connection. Now, Job does not lash out at God,
Hmm.
but you see this modeled in Jesus himself when he says, God, why have you forsaken me?
Hmm.
And you see it poetically modeled in the Psalms, where David says, you know everything about me. There's no point in sharing my feelings with you, but I'm going to share them anyways.
Hmm.
And then he vents.
Yeah.
He's like, these freaking people. And I hate these people who hate you. And
Hmm.
then at the end, he says, I don't know if I should have felt this way. Guide me on the path of righteousness.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of directness is, in a sense, the emotional finale
Mm-hmm.
of Job. He has let go of the God, Lord gives and takes away, blessed be the name of the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
And this has seems to have very little bearing, I think, to might appear to have no bearing for a secular listener.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll say relationships with non-divine powers,
Mm-hmm.
with spouses and with friends can be like that.
Yeah.
There is tremendous value in being kind of confrontational and direct
Mm-hmm.
and sharing your thoughts, bringing how you're actually feeling to the table. If
Mm-hmm.
that scares some people away, excellent.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%.
uh,
Yeah.
but being willing to have the conflicts, and I guess no one knows who these people are, so I can share this. My parents were getting divorced, finished getting divorced last year,
mm,
and it was one of those you can see it coming from 15 years in the
mm-hmm.
past, because they could never have any direct conflicts about it. They're both good people, very good people, who
Mm-hmm.
could just never have that. They could never
Mm,
have that fight.
mm-hmm.
They always tried to, if they couldn't say, "Oh, the Lord gives and takes away, blessed be the name of the Lord," they would just avoid it.
If you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. That kind of thing.
Right. That's
Yeah.
horrible advice. That's
Yeah.
horrible advice.
Yeah. Good stuff. Good stuff. Yeah. I mean, that is a very interesting perspective on the book of Job. It's definitely one of the, well, I mean, if you believe that as I think most Christians do, Catholics definitely do, believe that scripture is inspired by, the Holy Spirit. So there's an infinite depth to it. Um, obviously every book is going to have its own complexities. I think Job is one of the most complicated ones to just kind of take apart,
It's
because
also the oldest book
yeah. Yeah. So
in the Bible, I should say.
yeah. Yeah. The oldest one that was written down, oral tradition,
Yeah.
all these things. But
I'm more of
that's
a Homer guy myself.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I was hoping we'd get into that, but we're going kind of long here, so I think we should
Sure.
probably
Yeah.
wrap. But yeah, man, I mean, this has been an awesome conversation. I do have to say, I really love the perspective your page brings with everything. As you've probably realized by now, I don't agree with a lot of it, but I really appreciate having
Sure.
those, outside perspectives, challenging beliefs, and just having this new flow of information and people that are willing to, reason things out. And I do, want to say thank you for, being somebody that is not a believer, but also willing to honestly entertain, things like the Bible and other writers and stuff like that. Because I think,
beyond entertain it, also enjoy it.
yeah, 100%. And that's so important. And that's something that I think has been really lost, where people pick their ideological camp and then they just don't talk with anyone that's outside ever. And, you just stick with, the dogmatic teachings of whoever is at the top at all times, and never actually ask yourself what does this mean long term, what bearing does this have on my life, like we said very early on. But yeah, so Chris, thank you so much for coming on, man. This has been an awesome conversation. It's been a joy to have you. And yeah, I'm sure the listeners are going to enjoy this as well. And guys, if you have any pushback that you want to give on anything, you have any questions, you can hop in my DMs, obviously. Are they welcome to do the same for you?
For sure. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. So they can find you at Caffeine and Philosophy on Instagram. I'll have that in the show notes here. Do you have any other projects or anything going on right now that they can check out?
Yes. I have a number of essays, some of which are already published, one of which is not, coming out in a book that the Order of Fire is publishing soon. Massive essay. It's like a 50-page essay on phenomenology and the history of philosophy and the origins of postmodernism and the blood feud. So that should be interesting for philosophy nerds. To your point about entertaining other ideas, I am as strong of an anti-Marxist as anybody. I'm a huge James Lindsay fan. I actually quoted two Marxists without any adversity, Adorno and Horkheimer in particular. So you can find interesting stuff in all kinds of places.
Yeah, and I mean that goes back to what we said about Tate. You don't have to agree with everything the guy says to think like maybe I should take life seriously. Maybe I should play like things matter. Maybe I should
Precisely.
take a look at, who's actually like pulling the strings behind the scenes, who's actually influencing my life, and then how can I get some of that sovereignty back and actually, build a life that I'm hopefully proud of and able to, have that sovereignty that we talked about.
Exactly.
But yeah.
That book, which has the essay on modernism and postmodernism,
Mhm.
as well as some essays that are already published on the Pater website, which is PH2T3R,
I'll link
uh,
that as well. Yeah.
on the spiritual origins of science, which might be of interest to a religious
Mhm.
audience, um, and also the Cattle of the Sun, which is more of a pagan Homeric thing, but
Mhm.
is perhaps also may be of interest to some people who are interested in learning that.
100%. Yeah. And I mean, Homer's a good read, man. There's a reason those
It
books have
is.
lasted so long. So,
As G.K. Chesterton said, if you're the last man on earth, you would have few better options than to quote the Iliad and die.
yes. Good stuff. All right. Thank you again, brother. And that concludes episode 8 of the Operation Paragon podcast. It was an honor to have Chris on. As you probably heard, he has a wealth of extremely in depth knowledge, and that's reflected in his writing. So if this kind of critical analysis of life interests you, I highly recommend checking him out at Caffeine and Philosophy on Instagram. And then he also has much longer works available both in published works and the internet, all the places that he mentioned towards the end of the interview here. The related links will, of course, be in the show notes if you're interested. If you want to get in touch with me, you can DM Operation Paragon on Instagram or email operationparagonpodcast@gmail.com. Until next time, remember that greatness is within your reach.